All right, it's time to stitch this thing. Now, while y'all weren't looking, I went ahead and cut the belt slots. So, and I did the touching up in on those and the burnishing on those. But I wanted to get to the stitching. Okay, let me show you this first. I've got one needle already locked on. And it's time to do the other. First thing I do is I go ahead and flatten out the end of the thread and pass it through the eye of the needle. Bring it around, then I'll make a flat spot on the thread with my thumbnail. Put the point of the needle against that and pierce the thread with the needle. Pull that down and through. And boop, over the eye. And that one's locked on. Now the way I'm going to stitch this is I'm going to start from back here, come around this way, and then down that way, and finish my stitch right there. The reason I'm going to do it that way is I think this area right here gets the less amount of stress. There's more stress at the mouth because you're putting the gun in and taking it out and stuff. So let's see if I need to open these holes there. That's okay right there. Put the needles in. Even out my threads. And well, start stitching. That needle goes in. This needle goes on top. Pulls that through, and then I turn it around so the second needle goes on the bottom side of the first thread. Boop. Give this thread a tug to see if I pierced it. Because at this point, if you pierced it, you can do something about it. If you went ahead and pulled it on through and you pierced it, then that's kind of a pain in the rear. You got to take it all apart, take the needles off, and basically start all over. There we go. And that's our first stitch. Make sure my needles are still even. And they are. And then we'll continue with our next stitch. Now, giving that a little bit of a wiggle will temporarily open that hole, which will make it a little bit easier to get the stitching done. The leather will reclose and actually grip the thread. Okay, needle goes in, second one goes on top, goes under the first thread, tug. Yep. This thing is moving all over the place. It's usually a lot more even than that. Well, let me keep going. Okay, now, one thing about stitching, something that helps to make it a little bit more comfortable, is don't drop your needles. What I mean is the needles are either in my hands or they're in the leather. Like right there. Give that a wiggle. Needles in the leather. Now I have both needles in this hand. And again, needles in the leather. And now I have one needle in each hand. If you drop your needles, like I've seen some people do, what they'll do is they'll do that, and then they'll pull through and drop it, and then go through there. And, they'll do the tug and all. Then they'll pull that through and drop it. Then you got to go fishing for your needles. And I figure, why don't you just keep them in your hands? So anyway, I'm going to keep stitching, And we'll be back when I get a little bit further on this. Let me just show you something here real quick. We're approaching the corner. And so far, I've been pulling the thread back and putting the second needle under. Oop, excuse me. I got a couple more to do like that. Give the needle a little wiggle. Whoops, see, that always happens when I got the camera on. Never happens otherwise. Okay, we're coming to the corner here. I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing. But once we turn the corner, I want to do it the other way around. Since we're going away instead of toward me, I got to do the opposite. This goes in, second needle still goes on top, but it goes over the first thread. And even though it's going to sit down in a groove, it's still going to put a little bit of an angle on the thread, and it'll give it a more consistent appearance. And like I said before, the stitches are part of the aesthetics, so you got to pay attention. Goes in, next one goes on top, give it a tug, and you're off. Oop. Okay, now I'm going to keep going, and we'll go ahead and finish this. Okay, we're approaching the end of this stitch and run here, and soon we're going to be doing our back stitching. Been doing it the same way. All the way down. That gives me a nice, clean, smooth stitching line. And basically that's what I want. Because if you got a stitch line that isn't nice and consistent, well, a lot of times people don't really notice that. But I do. And I want to look good. Now I always talk about the details. And that's one of the little details you want to take care of. See, now there's your stitch line. You can see that. Ta-da! And now I'm going to go ahead and do my back stitch. I haven't burnished the edges yet because when I glued it, in fact you can kind of see it here, right here, it didn't really close it up. I don't know if you can see that or not, but the edge isn't closed all the way to the corner, so that means I'm going to do my edge burnishing after my stitching to get that consistent edge, so that looks good. So anyway, we're down at the end, and you look at the angle that the thread sits at. This one goes toward the top, so I'm going to bias this needle toward the top, push it through, pull it all the way through. And this needle will go toward the bottom of the hole. And what that'll do is my the threads that I'm stitching back with will follow the threads that I stitched out with. And that'll help to conceal the back stitch. Okay, that's two. Smooth jawed, flat nose pliers. Because that hole's got a lot of thread in it. And sometimes I need help getting that needle all the way through. Okay, that goes up. This one goes under. Now, even if I could afford a machine, or if I had the room for the machine, I think I'd still prefer to stitch it by hand for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's more rewarding to do this by hand, and another reason is a double needle hand stitch overall is just a stronger stitch than a lock stitch. If you had trousers or something that had a stitch line in it and the thread broke and the stitch line just kind of pulls out, that's what a lock stitch does. That's not going to happen with a saddle stitch. It's also one of the reasons I don't like drilled holes. With a punched hole, even though you waller out the hole a little bit, or I do sometimes to get the needle through, the thread, or rather the leather, will close up on the thread, and that'll help to hold it in place. I guess if I had like a big production line or something, or did this as a business, then yeah, I might be able to, I might be willing to sacrifice a bit for speed and get a machine to do that. Alright, that's our back stitching. We'll cut the threads, leaving, I think about getting a new light, about that much. So we'll just take a lighter to that and melt them down. The thread I'm using is a continuous filament waxed polyester cord. It's a bit larger than 1 mil, and it's what I use when I want the stitch line to stand out more. Anyway, I'm going to do the same to this side, and when we come back, we're going to get some edge burnishing done. See you then.